A fun day at the water park turns into a nightmare when a lifeguard's hidden racism nearly costs a little girl her life. Stay until the end. It will leave you speechless. Before we start, comment where you're watching from, subscribe, and hit the bell for more powerful stories. The summer sun was blazing over the city, painting the sky a cloudless blue and making the air shimmer with heat. Families filled the streets with laughter and chatter, children ran with melting ice creams, and water sprinklers hissed on green lawns. For 9-year-old Layla Carter, this day meant more than just summer fun. It was a dream she had waited for all year. Layla had never been to an aqua park before. Her mother, Denise, had promised to take her once she saved enough money from working double shifts at the local diner. Today, after months of overtime and sleepless nights, Denise had finally bought 2 tickets to the famous Blue Wave Water Park, the largest and most spectacular aqua park in the entire state. The moment they passed through the turnstiles, Layla's eyes widened in awe. Towering slides twisted into the sky like colorful serpents. Children screamed with joy as they plunged into pools, and fountains erupted in playful arcs, glittering under the sun. Music played from hidden speakers, and the smell of sunscreen and popcorn filled the air. It was everything she had imagined, and more. "Go on, baby," Denise smiled, handing her daughter a bright pink float ring. "This day is yours. Enjoy it." Layla hugged her mother tightly before dashing off toward the shallow pools. She splashed in the cool water, squealing with delight. For the first time in months, she felt truly happy, not just pretending for her mom's sake, not worrying about school bullies or the stares she sometimes got in their mostly white neighborhood. Today, she was just a kid. As she played, she noticed the tallest slide in the park, Thunderfall, a twisting tunnel of blue and white that towered above everything else. Children climbed the long staircase, laughing and cheering before plunging down the slippery tunnel. Layla's heart thumped with excitement. She wanted to ride it more than anything. She adjusted her float and started running toward the entrance of the slide, her wet feet pattering against the ground. The walkway was crowded with people, children running, parents calling out, water dripping everywhere. In her excitement, Layla didn't see the man stepping out from behind a lifeguard chair. The collision was small, a light bump of her shoulder against his arm, but the man spun around as if she had shoved him. "Watch where you're going, kid," he snapped. Layla froze. The man was tall and muscular, wearing the red uniform of a lifeguard. His name tag read Eric in bold letters. His expression hardened when his eyes landed on her. "Are you blind or just stupid?" he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "Little monkey, do you people ever look where you're going?" The words hit Layla like a slap. The world around her suddenly felt quieter, the music and laughter fading into the background. She stared at the ground, her heart pounding in her chest. I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to." But Eric wasn't done. His lips curled into a sneer as he stepped closer. "Now, look at the water," he said loudly enough for others nearby to hear. "Filthy, just like you. Maybe you should be cleaning the pool instead of swimming in it." A couple of teenagers nearby snickered. A woman standing by the railing glanced their way and then turned back to her phone. Nobody said anything. Nobody stepped in. Layla felt tears burn behind her eyes, but she swallowed them back. Her mother always told her to stay calm, to keep her head high no matter what. She forced herself to breathe. "I'm sorry," she said again, her voice barely audible. "I'll be more careful." She turned to walk away, wishing she could disappear. But as she took her first step, Eric shifted his leg ever so slightly into her path. She didn't see it. Her foot caught on his shin, and she stumbled forward. The world tilted. Layla's arms flailed as the pink float slipped from her hands. Then, splash. She hit the water hard, her head plunging below the surface. It wasn't the shallow pool anymore. She had fallen straight into the deep section of the plunge basin. Cold water flooded her mouth and nose as panic exploded inside her. She had never learned to swim. Her mother had promised they'd take lessons soon, but there had never been enough money. Layla thrashed wildly, her small arms cutting through the water in desperate, useless motions. The surface felt impossibly far above. I can't breathe. I can't. I'm going to drown. Bubbles streamed from her mouth as she tried to scream. Chlorinated water burned her lungs. She sank deeper, her chest tightening, the sunlight above blurring into a distant, unreachable glow. Faces peered down from above, but they looked small and distorted, like figures behind glass. Nobody was diving in. Nobody was helping. Then, just as the darkness crept closer, a strong arm wrapped around her waist and yanked her upward. Her head broke the surface, and she gasped for air, coughing violently as water spewed from her mouth. "Got her!" Eric shouted, hauling her to the side of the pool. Cheers erupted around them. A group of parents clapped. Someone shouted, "What a hero!" Another called, "That man saved her life!" Layla collapsed on the pool's edge, her body trembling uncontrollably. Water dripped from her hair and eyelashes as she stared at the concrete beneath her. She could still hear his voice echoing in her ears. Monkey. Filthy. I should be cleaning the pool. Eric stood above her, basking in the praise, shaking hands with a supervisor who had rushed over. "All in a day's work," he said with a smug smile. "She was careless, but I couldn't just let her drown." Nobody knew the truth. Nobody saw the foot that tripped her, the sneer that twisted his face, or the cruel words that cut her deeper than the water ever could. And Layla, sitting silently on the pool's edge, dripping and shivering, began to wonder if telling the truth would even matter. If anyone would believe a little black girl over a smiling white hero. But deep down, something in her changed that day. It was small and quiet, but it burned. A spark of anger and dignity that would not go out. This was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The cheers around the pool still rang in Layla's ears like tin bells, hollow and cruel. Moments earlier, the world had been a swirl of blue water and choking fear. Now, it was a stage where the wrong person bowed for applause. She sat hunched on the hot concrete, trembling, her fingers digging crescents into the rough edge of the deck as if it were the only solid thing left in the world. But the scene that would tattoo itself onto her memory had not begun with the splash. It had begun with the words. "Are you blind or just stupid?" Eric had said first, a lash of sound that snapped through the air. She remembered the metallic taste in her mouth as her tongue stuck to the roof, the way his shadow fell over her small frame, and then, when she tried to whisper an apology, he'd leaned in, close enough that she could smell the sharp tang of chlorine and sunblock on his skin. "Little monkey," he said, slow, as if savoring the shape of each letter. "Do you people ever learn how to behave?" The space around them had shifted. The music didn't stop, the slides didn't close, the fountains didn't fall silent. But something in the air tightened. The teenage boys by the rail exchanged glances and smirked. A girl with a glittery phone case lifted her camera halfway and then thought better of it, lowering it with a nervous giggle. A woman pushing a stroller paused, frowned for half a heartbeat, and then kept going, eyes sliding away as if not seeing could absolve her of witnessing. Layla's throat worked. "I'm sorry," she had said, even then, small and careful, the way her mother had taught her to say it when adults were angry and unpredictable. "I didn't mean to." "Look at the water now," Eric said, voice raised so it would carry. "Filthy. Just like you. Maybe you should be cleaning this place instead of swimming in it." A couple standing behind him laughed, the startled, ugly laughter of people who didn't quite realize what they were co-signing until it was too late. One of the teens added, half under his breath, "For real," as if it were the most natural thing in the world to approve of cruelty. Layla heard it. She heard everything. She felt each sound like gravel thrown against her skin. She willed her eyes to stay dry. Crying never helped. Tears made bullies feel justified. Tears told them they were winning. "Don't cry, Layla, don't cry." Her mother's voice, remembered and rescuing, threaded through the panic. "Keep your back straight. Keep your chin up. If you can't change their eyes, protect your own." "I'm sorry, sir," she had repeated a second time, quieter, as if maybe the words could patch the rip he'd made in her day. "I'll be more careful." For a brief moment, the moment of silence where she turned to go, she believed she had done the right thing. She believed she had selected the only safe path. Survival, her mother called it, in a way that sounded like dignity. She took a breath and moved her foot. Eric moved his. It was almost delicate the way he did it. A half shift of his weight, a casual slide of his leg into her path, a motion so practiced in its innocence that anyone glancing over would miss it. Layla's toes caught on the bone of his shin. Her knee buckled. Her hands reached for air. The world tilted. The float ring rolled away, bouncing against the deck with a cartoonish wobble that mocked what came after. The pool, not the shallow one she'd been playing in, but the deep blue basin where the slide ended, opened its mouth. She fell. Back on the hot concrete now, Layla's mind replayed the fall in stuttering fragments. The shot of pain as her shin struck the coping, the smear of sky across her vision as her body folded forward, the shout that might have been her own voice, the shock of water swallowing her whole. Then the terror, the dizzy blackout terror of lungs clawing for air and getting only sting and burn, and the taste of her own fear dissolving into chlorine. Even in memory, it was hard to breathe. Her hands moved to her chest now, pressing as if she could massage the pressure away. A lifeguard towel had been draped around her shoulders by someone, not Eric, not the man who had caused it. The towel was heavy and scratchy and smelled faintly of mildew. It anchored her to the present. Behind her, Eric laughed with someone. Poor kid was reckless, he was saying to a supervisor who had jogged over too late. "I saw her at the edge and dove without thinking. You know how it is. Instincts. Instincts." The word banged against the inside of Layla's skull, a jagged thing. Her instincts had told her to apologize. His had been to humiliate and harm, and then to don a mask of heroism. She stared at the wet footprints blooming on the concrete like pale ghosts. A pair of sneakers squeaked to a stop at her side. The girl with the glittery phone case hovered uncertainly, eyes flitting from Layla to Eric and back again. "Hey," the girl said, voice pitched to a whisper that didn't invite conversation. "Are you okay?" Layla nodded without looking up. The girl's relief, "Good," I asked, "I'm nice, now I can go," was almost audible. She left. The space filled with other voices, other footsteps, other small choices to care or not care that, collected, made a story larger than any of them. What had hurt most were not just the words themselves, though they had cut in ways she knew would take time to heal, but the silence that held them. The silence of the adults who should have said something. The silence of the rules posted at every entrance about respect and safety. The silence that told him he could do what he had done, and, if he played his part right afterward, be rewarded for it. She ran the words again in her head, the ones she wished belonged to some other day, to someone else's life. Little monkey, filthy, just like you people. You should be cleaning this place. They were a code. They said, you do not belong. Your joy is an intrusion. Your presence is contamination. They said, I can take your moment from you, and when I give it back, I'll have rewritten it so I'm the hero of it. Layla's breathing steadied. She pulled the towel tighter around herself and turned just enough to see the water, still laughing in the sunlight, indifferent. Her mother would be looking for her. Denise had gone to get bottled water and sunscreen, back in 5, baby, and had missed the collision, the insults, the fall. Layla felt a rush of relief at that, then a pang of guilt for the relief. She didn't want her mother to carry this hurt. She also didn't want to carry it alone. The supervisor clapped Eric on the shoulder. You did good, he said, loud enough to be heard by anyone who needed a story to take home. Exactly what we trained you to do. Eric's answering chuckle slid across Layla's skin like oil. All in a day's work. Near the slide stairs, one of the teenage boys reenacted a dramatic dive for his friend, then flexed at an invisible audience. Their laughter rose, bright and idiotic, and Layla felt a strange, small calm settle under the anger. It was a quiet thing, like the center of a storm. Not peace, exactly, but a stillness that allowed her to stand up without wobbling. She stood. Her legs felt rubbery, but they held. She picked up her float ring from where it had drifted and tucked it under her arm. Eric noticed the movement and turned. For a second, their eyes met. His smile didn't reach his eyes. It was a dead thing. You're welcome, he said, voice flat like a reissued threat. Layla held his gaze. She didn't thank him. She didn't speak at all. She turned her head and walked away, each step a decision, each decision a thin, bright wire strung taut across the day. Behind her, applause sputtered and died for lack of a performer willing to bow again. The walkway to the picnic tables felt longer on the return trip. With each pace, pieces of the moment clicked into place inside her. The insults, the silence, the trip, the drowning that was not an accident. Part of her wanted to run to her mother, fling herself into those safe arms, and sob until the ache dissolved. Another part of her, older and more watchful than 9 years should have had to be, wanted to hold this pain until she knew what to do with it. At a bend in the path, she passed a sign she hadn't noticed before. Respect all guests, no discrimination, zero tolerance. The letters were cheerful blue, the kind chosen to look friendly in brochures. Layla paused long enough to trace one letter with her fingertip. The paint was smooth and cool. Words were easy on signs. It was people who made them heavy. A commotion swelled by the gate, a cluster of staff rushing somewhere with radios chirping. Layla didn't turn to look. She didn't need to. Wherever they were going, the truth had not been invited. Not yet. She found her mother scanning the crowd near the shade of a striped umbrella, worry already knitting her brow. Denise took one look, the damp hair, the too large towel, the tremble that Layla tried to hide by setting her jaw, and her face softened and sharpened at the same time, the way it always did when her daughter needed her most. What happened? She asked, low and even, the tone that said, tell me everything and I will hold it with you. Layla opened her mouth, closed it, swallowed. The words crowded her throat, jostling to be first, The names he called her, the way the teenagers laughed, the hiss of water in her ears when the world went dark, the applause that felt like a bruise. She chose the smallest one. "I fell," she said, not as a lie, but as a beginning. "I slipped." Denise's eyes searched her daughter's face, not the words, but the spaces between them. She nodded once, as if to say, "We will come back to the rest when you are ready." Then she sat beside her on the bench, unscrewed the cap of the water bottle, and pressed it gently into Layla's hands. "Drink slow," she said. "Breathe slow." They sat like that for a while, shoulder to shoulder, the noise of the park flowing around them like a river around a rock. When Layla's hands stopped shaking and the stutter in her chest settled into a rhythm, Denise touched 2 fingers to her daughter's chin and lifted it. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said. It was not a question, it was a spell, spoken to scatter the shame that cruel men hoped would burrow and grow. "You hear me?" Layla nodded. The spark she had felt earlier, the one she could not yet name, glowed warmer. It was not vengeance. It was not yet courage. It was something like a promise that tensed the line of her spine and widened the set of her gaze. She looked back toward the pool deck. From this distance, Eric was just a red blur against blue water, a figure whose edges the sun erased. He looked smaller, not harmless, never that, but smaller, as if the vantage point had stolen some of the power the crowd had given him. Layla slid off the bench and tucked herself under her mother's arm. She wasn't ready to tell everything, not yet, but she was ready to stand, ready to walk past the sign again, ready to carry the truth until the world made room for it. The day rolled on. The music kept playing. Children shouted and splashed. On the surface, the park resumed its choreography of delight. Underneath, in the hidden rooms where decisions were made and stories were filed and camera footage waited on silent hard drives, something had begun to shift. Before the sun set, a man in a well-worn baseball cap would enter through a side gate and walk the perimeter as if taking measure. He would ask quiet questions. He would linger by the office door. No one would recognize him, not yet. To most, he would look like a father waiting for a daughter to finish playing. Layla didn't know any of that. She knew only what her body had learned, how words could shove as hard as hands, how silence could be a crowd, how standing up could feel like swimming after all. Arms cut in water, lungs burning, until you found your breath again. She reached for her mother's hand. Denise squeezed back. They stood together and began to walk, not away from what had happened, but toward the part of the day where something might finally be done about it. The instant her body broke the surface of the water, the world dissolved into chaos. Cold, chlorinated liquid swallowed her whole, rushing into her nose and mouth as if it were trying to claim every breath she had. Layla's arms flailed instinctively, but it was no use. The water was too deep, too heavy, too relentless. Her pink float ring, once a promise of safety, bobbed uselessly several feet away. She had never learned to swim. That fact hit her harder than the fall itself. She remembered the time she had begged her mother for lessons, remembered Denise's tight smile and whispered, "Next summer, baby. I promise. We'll save for it." And now, here she was, a 9-year-old girl in a sea too big for her, lungs burning, heart pounding, legs kicking in vain. She tried to scream, but the water silenced her, filling her mouth with its bitter taste. Panic seized her like a vice. The edges of her vision blurred, the muffled sounds of laughter and splashing above turning distant and distorted. For a moment, she thought she could see the sunlight shimmering far above, a blurry, unreachable promise of air. But it felt miles away. I'm going to die, she thought. I'm going to die and no one will know the truth. Her thoughts splintered into flashes. Her mother's smile that morning, the taste of the pancake she'd eaten for breakfast, the sting of Eric's words echoing inside her skull, "Filthy, monkey, you people don't belong here." They swirled with the water around her, blurring into a suffocating darkness. Then, just as her body began to go limp, a hand clamped around her arm. Another wrapped firmly around her waist. The sudden pull upward felt like a miracle, or a trick. Within seconds, her head broke through the surface and she gasped, coughing and choking, water streaming from her mouth as if she were trying to spit out the nightmare itself. "Got her!" Eric's voice cut through the noise. Arms dragged her toward the pool's edge. She clung to the rough tiles, hacking and crying, too weak to pull herself up. People rushed over, adults, children, strangers with towels, but none of them had seen the trip, none of them had heard the poison in his voice. All they saw was the heroic lifeguard pulling a helpless girl from the water. Applause erupted around them. "Wow, that was quick thinking," someone shouted. "He saved her life," another added. "Real hero work, man." Eric stood there, chest puffed out, basking in their praise. His wet hair clung to his forehead, his red uniform plastered against his muscular frame. He extended a hand toward Layla, as if expecting her gratitude. "You're safe now," he said smoothly, his voice completely devoid of the hatred that had dripped from it minutes earlier. "Next time, try to be more careful." Layla stared at him, her chest still heaving, and for a split second she thought about screaming, about telling everyone what had really happened. But the words lodged in her throat. Who would believe her? She was a little black girl who had slipped, and he was the brave white man who had saved her. The crowd had already chosen the story they wanted to believe. A woman knelt beside her, patting her back. "You're okay, sweetheart," she said softly. "You're lucky he was here." Lucky. The word made Layla's stomach twist. Was she lucky? Lucky that the man who had humiliated her, who had shoved his hatred into her ears and tripped her into danger, was the same man now smiling for cameras and praise? Lucky that she was alive, but not believed. Eric crouched next to her, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "See?" he whispered, the edges of his lips curling into a smirk. "Now everyone thinks I'm a hero. And you? You're just the clumsy little girl who fell into the pool." Tears welled up in Layla's eyes. She hated them, hated how they betrayed the storm inside her, hated how he seemed to enjoy every tremble of her lip. She turned away from him, focusing on the water rippling gently at her feet. Her heart was pounding, but a deeper feeling was growing beneath the fear, a burning ember of anger that refused to go out. The crowd slowly dispersed as staff members helped her stand and guided her to a shaded bench. A paramedic checked her breathing and asked a few questions, but Layla barely heard them. Her mind replayed the scene over and over, each detail seared into her memory. The sneer on Eric's face, the deliberate shift of his leg, the helplessness she felt as the water swallowed her. The worst part wasn't the drowning. It was the lie. She glanced toward Eric. He was still talking to people, laughing, shaking hands, reenacting how he leapt into action. They hung on his every word, showering him with praise he didn't deserve. "You're a real lifesaver, man. She's lucky you were here." Not everyone would react that fast. Not everyone would push a child into the water either, Layla thought bitterly. A group of staff members walked past her, murmuring about giving him an employee award. One even mentioned nominating him for Lifeguard of the Month. Each word was a knife, twisting deeper. She felt a presence beside her. It was the girl with the glittery phone case again. She looked hesitant, chewing on her lip. "Hey," she said softly. "I saw something. I think he might have stuck his leg out." Layla's head snapped toward her. "You saw?" The girl's face flushed. "I'm not sure. Maybe I imagined it. I don't want to get in trouble. Sorry." She walked away before Layla could say anything else. Hope rose and died in the same breath. Even if someone had seen, they wouldn't speak up. People didn't want trouble. People didn't want to challenge heroes. By the time her mother returned from the snack stand, Layla had dried off, but the weight inside her hadn't lifted. Denise's eyes widened when she saw her daughter wrapped in a towel, looking pale and shaken. "What happened?" she asked urgently. "I fell," Layla said quietly. "I wasn't watching where I was going." The lie slipped out easier than she expected, maybe because it was the one everyone else had already decided was true. Denise hugged her tightly, murmuring reassurances, but Layla's eyes drifted back to the pool, to Eric, who was still smiling, still waving, still collecting praise for saving her life. In that moment, something hardened inside her. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was a vow. One day, she told herself, the truth would come out. One day, the world would know who he really was. And when that day came, the man they called a hero would finally be seen for what he truly was. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, painting the park in golden light. The day that was supposed to be perfect had turned into a nightmare. But deep down, beneath the fear and humiliation, a storm was gathering. And Layla, though she didn't know it yet, was at its center. 3 days passed, but for Layla, time seemed to crawl rather than move. Each night, as she lay in bed, the memory replayed itself like a cruel loop. The sting of Eric's words, the cold hands of water pulling her under, and the thunderous applause that crowned him a hero. She woke from dreams gasping for air, clutching her chest as if still drowning. Even at school, where she usually loved science class and lunchtime jokes with her friends, she felt distant. The world had shifted beneath her, and she no longer trusted its ground. But while she struggled with the weight of silence, something was already in motion far beyond her sight. At the Blue Wave Water Park, the owner had returned from a business trip earlier than expected. His name was Marcus Carter, a tall, commanding black man, known for his sharp suits and sharper sense of justice. The staff whispered about his reputation. Fair, but relentless, a man who built his empire from nothing and who ran it with an iron sense of right and wrong. What most of them didn't know, or had forgotten, was that Marcus was also Layla's father. He had built this place as a gift for families like his, families who didn't always feel welcome in the city's expensive, predominantly white spaces. And when his wife told him their daughter had a little accident at the park and came home shaken, his instincts told him something was wrong. He had seen enough in his life to know that accidents weren't always accidental. So, on a quiet Wednesday morning, Marcus arrived unannounced. He walked through the staff entrance without his usual entourage, wearing plain clothes and a baseball cap pulled low. He spoke to no one at first, just walked the perimeter, watched interactions, listened to conversations, and everywhere he went, he heard the same thing. That lifeguard, Eric, he's a real hero. Yeah, saved some little girl from drowning. They're talking about giving him an award. Good man, knows how to do his job. Each word made Marcus's jaw tighten. If there was one thing he knew from a lifetime of fighting to be seen as more than a stereotype, it was how quickly lies could cement themselves as truth. But Marcus Carter hadn't become a successful businessman by trusting words. He trusted evidence. And his water park had cameras, dozens of them. He made his way to the control room and asked the technician on duty to pull the footage from the day of the incident. At first, the young man hesitated, offering vague excuses. Marcus fixed him with a stare so cold that resistance melted. Within minutes, the footage was on screen. There it was. Every moment. The collision, the cruel insults, the mocking sneer. Do you people ever learn how to behave? Filthy, just like you. You should be cleaning the pool instead of swimming in it. The technician's eyes widened, his face draining of color. Sir, I had no idea. Save it. Marcus cut him off. Download every angle, every second. The next step was personal. He wanted to look Eric in the eye. He found him by the main pool, basking in the attention of a group of staff members. They were laughing as Eric retold the story of his heroic rescue for what must have been the 10th time. He was animated, gesturing with his hands as if narrating a dramatic scene from a movie. She slipped, poor thing, Eric said with a grin. One second she's standing there, the next, splash. I didn't even think. Instinct took over. I dove in, pulled her out before she went under. The group clapped and cheered. Man, you're a legend, one of them said. Marcus waited until the laughter died before stepping forward. Eric, he said evenly, his voice calm but heavy. Eric turned, flashing his trademark smirk. Yes, sir. Can I help you? Come with me, Marcus said simply. We need to talk. The lifeguard followed him into a small conference room off the main office, still riding the wave of his own glory. But as soon as the door shut and Marcus removed his cap, revealing the face that every employee knew but rarely saw up close, Eric's confidence faltered. Mr. Carter, I didn't realize. Sit, Marcus ordered. Eric obeyed. The room fell into a tense silence. I've been watching the footage from the incident last weekend, Marcus began. The one where you supposedly saved a little girl's life. Eric nodded, forcing a humble smile. Yes, sir. I'm just grateful I was there in time. Marcus pressed a button on the remote in his hand. A large monitor on the wall came to life, and there it was, the unfiltered truth planned out in painful detail. Eric's words, his sneer, the deliberate shift of his leg, Layla's body tumbling into the water. The room felt smaller with each second of footage. Eric's face went pale, his mouth opening and closing without sound. I can explain, he stammered. It's not what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like. Marcus snapped, rising from his seat. You harassed a child. You used racial slurs. You tripped her into a pool knowing she couldn't swim. And then you stood there and let the world believe you were a hero. Eric swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. I didn't mean to. You could have killed her. Marcus's voice boomed now, filling every corner of the room. Do you understand that? A 9-year-old girl could have drowned because of your hate? Eric's jaw trembled. Please, sir, I need this job. I wasn't thinking. Oh, you were thinking. Marcus cut him off. You were thinking that she was too small, too black, too powerless to speak up. You were thinking that no one would believe her over a smiling white lifeguard. And you were right. For 3 days they didn't. Eric's shoulders sagged, his head dropping into his hands. Marcus stared at him in disgust. That little girl you called filthy? He paused, his voice cold and deliberate. She's my daughter. Eric's head shot up, his eyes wide with shock. Your daughter?" "Yes." Marcus's tone was razor sharp now. "And I will not tolerate anyone, not in my company, not in my park, endangering my child or anyone else's because of their skin color." He walked to the door and opened it. 2 security guards were waiting outside. "You're fired," Marcus said flatly, "effective immediately, and I'm pressing charges for assault and endangerment. I will also be releasing this footage to the media. The public deserves to know the kind of hero you really are." Eric tried one last plea, his voice breaking. "Please, Mr. Carter, I have a family." "So does mine," Marcus replied coldly, "and you almost destroyed it." The guards stepped forward, taking Eric by the arms. He didn't fight as they led him away, his once confident stride now replaced by the shuffle of a man whose lies had finally caught up with him. When the door closed, Marcus sank back into his chair, the anger slowly draining from his face. The image of Layla's terrified eyes as she sat by the pool that day haunted him. He vowed it would never happen again. That afternoon, an internal memo was sent to every employee. It announced new policies: 0 tolerance for discrimination, mandatory anti-bias training, and a thorough review of all hiring practices. But Marcus wasn't stopping there. He scheduled a press conference for the next morning, not to protect his company's image, but to speak a truth that too many people still refused to hear. The truth was simple. The real danger that day wasn't the water. It was hate, disguised as authority, weaponized by power, and applauded as heroism. And Marcus Carter was determined to make sure the world saw it clearly. The press conference took place under a sky streaked with pale orange light, the kind of morning glow that usually marked the beginning of an ordinary day. But nothing about this day was ordinary. Reporters lined the gates of Blue Wave Water Park, cameras perched on tripods, microphones ready to capture every word. The story had spread like wildfire overnight. Lifeguard's racist attack caught on camera. Hero turned villain. Truth behind viral rescue. The footage Marcus Carter had released to the public had detonated across social media. Millions had seen it now. The cruel words, the deliberate trip, the desperate struggle of a little black girl underwater. And they'd seen the same man who caused it smiling for applause. Outrage roared from every corner of the country. People protested outside the water park. Parents canceled memberships. Advocacy groups called for legal action. But inside the Carter household, the morning was quiet. Layla sat by the kitchen table in her pajamas, staring at a newspaper headline bearing her story. She traced the letters of her name with a small finger, still not fully believing that the world was talking about her. "Are you ready?" her father asked gently from across the table. She looked up. Marcus was dressed sharply, his tie perfectly knotted, but his eyes were softer than she'd ever seen them. Her mother stood beside him, resting a reassuring hand on Layla's shoulder. "I don't know," Layla admitted. "What if they don't listen?" "They will," Marcus said firmly. "And even if they don't, you speak anyway, because your voice matters, because this is about more than just you." She swallowed hard. She wasn't sure she wanted the attention, the cameras, the flashing lights. But she was sure one thing: silence had almost drowned her once. She wouldn't let it drown her again. The press conference began with Marcus at the podium, his deep, steady voice carrying over the crowd. 3 days ago, he began, a man many hailed as a hero was celebrated for saving a child's life. But today, we know the truth. He was the reason that child nearly lost it. He used hate as a weapon. He used his position to humiliate, to harm, and then to hide behind the very uniform meant to protect. Reporters scribbled furiously. Flashbulbs popped. This water park was built to be a place of joy and safety for all families, Marcus continued. But racism has a way of sneaking into even the places meant for happiness. It's not enough to remove one bad actor. We must change the system that allows people like him to thrive. He outlined sweeping reforms: mandatory anti-discrimination training for all staff, an anonymous reporting hotline, diversity initiatives, and community outreach programs to make the park welcoming for everyone. But the heart of the event wasn't his speech, it was the next one. "And now," Marcus said, stepping aside, "someone else wants to speak." Layla's heart pounded as she walked to the podium. The crowd seemed enormous, faces stretching far beyond the cameras, hundreds of eyes watching her every move. For a moment, she thought her voice would fail. Then she remembered the water closing over her head, the silence of the people around her, the sting of those words, "filthy." "Monkey, you people." She took a deep breath and spoke into the microphone. "My name is Layla Carter," she began, her voice trembling but clear. "I'm 9 years old. I love science, I love water parks, and I love swimming, even though I don't know how yet." A ripple of soft laughter moved through the crowd, easing the tension. "3 days ago I almost drowned," she continued, "but that's not the part that hurts the most. The part that hurts is what was said to me before it happened. That I was stupid, that I was dirty, that people like me don't belong. And when I fell into the water, nobody saw the truth. They only saw a hero. They believed the lie." Her small hands tightened on the edges of the podium. "But I do belong. We all do. And nobody, not one single person, should ever be made to feel like they're less than human because of the color of their skin." The square erupted in applause, louder than she'd expected. She blinked, surprised, and for the first time in days, the heaviness in her chest began to lift. It wasn't gone, maybe it never would be, but something new had taken root in its place: strength. Later that day, the news broadcasts would replay her speech over and over. People across the country would share it online, calling her the bravest girl in America. Schools would use her words in classroom discussions about racism and courage. Even lawmakers would reference her case as they debated stronger protections against discrimination in public spaces. And Eric? His fall was as swift as his rise had been false. Fired, charged, and publicly condemned, he vanished from the headlines as quickly as he had entered them, a footnote in a story that was no longer his to control. But the legacy of that day stretched far beyond one man's disgrace. The Carter family launched a foundation to provide free swimming lessons for underprivileged children and scholarships for kids of color pursuing careers in safety and emergency services. Blue Wave Water Park transformed into a symbol of change. The very place where hate had once thrived became a beacon of inclusion and respect. Months later, Layla returned to the pool that had once terrified her. This time, she stood at the edge with her swim instructor by her side. She took a deep breath, stepped into the water, and began to paddle. Clumsy and awkward at first, but moving forward with determination. "Look at you," Denise cheered from the sidelines. "You're swimming." Layla laughed, splashing toward the other end of the pool. And when she reached it, she turned to see her father smiling proudly from a deck chair. He gave her a thumbs up, not for being strong or brave or resilient, but for simply being herself. She floated on her back, staring up at the endless summer sky. It had taken only a moment for one man's hatred to try to pull her under, but it had taken courage, hers and that of the people who stood with her, to rise above it. And rise she did. Because no matter how deep the water, no matter how heavy the weight of ignorance and hate,